um, a commandment or a core commandment of the Torah. So that's what we're here to address: is how is this even practical to expect someone to care about someone else the way they care about themselves? That's the question. But we're going to learn something about Rashi, and specifically Rabbi Akiva, that is going to open our eyes to the value system, the core value system that the Torah gives us to fulfill every other mitzvah that we have in the Torah. So let's get right into it. So we know that Rashi will only address something if there's a question. If there's no question, he won't address it. That's number one. Number two, if Rashi does address something, he will address the core facts, the core idea. He won't get into the sources of it. He won't give multiple explanations unless they're necessary. So the verse that we have in our parsha is very simple. Do not take revenge. Do not bear grudge. Leisitar also means to not, even like the opposite of revenge. Like you're going to say, I'm not taking revenge, but I'm doing this just because to show you that I'm a better person. That's also prohibited. And then the verse finishes off, you should love your neighbor as yourself. That's the key here. I am Hashem. And as something that Rashi has taught us in other verses is that whenever it says Ani Hashem in the verse, it's something that is given over to the heart, which means that it's not necessarily going to be known. No one's going to be able to measure or judge you if you've accomplished it right or not. But the only one that will be able to do that is Hashem. So Hashem is reminding us that even though you won't have outsiders or you won't have an audience that's going to confirm or deny that you've accomplished this mitzvah, Hashem is saying, I know if you're going to do that or not. So what does Rashi say? Rashi quotes the words and he quotes the source. Rabbi Akiva says this is a great principle of the Torah. I want to just mention that in the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership, the Rebbe selected 12 verses or 12 sayings that the Rebbe considered to be core values that should be taught to all children. And we would study it by heart as children. And we also would say these 12 verses, what we call 12 verses, or the 12 quotes, whenever we had a gathering. And one of those quotes was this one right here, exactly what's on the screen, quoting the Ve'av from the Torah. You should love your fellow as yourself. And then Rabbi Akiva says this is a great principle of the Torah. So the question that Rabbi is going to ask, as usual, on this type of thing, is number one, why does Rashi even say anything in the first place? What's the question? Let's go back to the verse itself. Very simple. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. Where's the question that Rashi is coming to answer? That's number one. And number two, why does Rashi quote the who said this thing? Just say this is a great principle of the Torah. If Rashi is quoting the name of the person, in this case it's Rabbi Akiva, there has to be something unique and connected to the person that is being quoted to the answer that is being given by Rashi. So now we're going to go over to another discussion that is on a similar topic, which is the famous one of Hillel. We all know the story, so we'll recap it quickly. There was a individual interested in converting to Judaism, and he comes to Shammai, and he wants to learn the entire Torah while standing on one foot. And it says Shammai pushed him away, but it wasn't from an evil point of view. It was saying, don't limit the Torah, don't try to condense the Torah until you're to what's comfortable to you. Very often we want things simplified and things made meaningful for us, even at the cost of the core of what's being taught. So let's say you want to go and learn a new concept. Let's say you want to go to university or college and learn about space, or learn about astronomy, or learn about any complex subject. You can't just walk in and say, hey, teach me the entire concept, while I'm standing on one foot. It's offensive, because here they're spending their entire lives and years trying to understand it and comprehend it, and you're trying to turn it into something that won't be comfortable to you. How much more so with the Torah, where you're trying to say, hey, could you make this relevant or make this simple for me? That was what Shammai was trying to undo. But Hillel, of course, accepted him and gave him the answer. As we all know, what you don't have, the way you don't want to be treated, don't do that to somebody else. And to the reverse as well. The way you don't want to be treated, that's how you should treat the other person. So the Alter Rebbe asks on this question, on the story, how is it possible that that encompasses the entire Torah? If anything, it just encompasses the mitzvot that are between us and other people. in other words, other human beings. But we all know there's a whole category of mitzvos between us and God, such as keeping Shabbat, keeping kosher, and so on, putting on tefillin, saying the Shema. All these mitzvos are between us and God. So how would not doing to your friend what you don't want done to yourself, how could that be the encompassing factor of this mitzvah? So the Gemara tells here's the story that we just read. So the Gemara tells the story, and the Alter Rebbe asks the question on the story, and the Alter Rebbe answers in brief that because the idea of achieving spiritual connection to Hashem is becoming selfless and realizing that we all come from the same source and we all come from the same core. So if you're prioritizing your spiritual nature and your spiritual self and your soul, then you obviously care about your fellow just as much as you care about yourself, because you realize you're of the same entity, the same essence. But to our story, we don't really need any deeper explanation. What is Rashi trying to answer here? It's saying love your fellow as yourself. It's very difficult, but it's also not saying that this is the entire Torah. It's an important principle of the Torah. It's a great principle of the Torah. But what is Rashi trying to answer? And then what is he trying to bring from Rabbi Akiva? What is he trying to accomplish by mentioning the source of this statement? So let's break this down into the way mitzvahs are taught to us. There are 613 commandments. Many of those commandments are interconnected with each other. So, for example, in Shabbat itself, there are many commandments that go together. So, putting on tefillin. So, for example, the hand tefillin is one mitzvah, the head tefillin is another mitzvah. The same goes with many other breakdowns of mitzvahs. There's different levels and there's different pieces of it, but they're all considered part of the same mitzvah. However, they go hand in hand, they go together. So here on the screen are a variation of these same mitzvos that you would technically consider caring about somebody else, call it charity, call it love, call it whatever you want to call it. But these are all mitzvos that are meant to help you become more sensitive and caring to the other person that you're supposed to care about and that you're supposed to take care of. So start with the top one. This is a very famous one called Peah and Leket, that when you're harvesting your crops, if you drop one, you should not pick it up. You should leave it for the poor. And of course, you should also start off by having a corner of your field that is, not just that you forgot it, but it's also part of it's part of what you're initially telling the poor, that this corner is for you to come and collect whatever you want, and this is where you can harvest your own crops for your own food. In fact, these fall into three different mitzvos. One is called leket, which means something that you dropped. Another one's called peah, which means the corner of a field that you leave for the poor person. And the third one is called shichita, that if you forget one of your sheaves of bundles in the field, you should leave it for the poor people to get it. So there are three different mitzvos, but they're all part of the same, not just the same mitzvah about caring about somebody else, but they're all part of the same action: harvesting your field, harvesting your crops. Within harvesting your crops and caring about poor people, there are three commandments that are very well connected, that are part of it. So where does this mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself come in? We already know from all the other places in the Torah that it tells us how we should treat the other person, that the Torah is pretty serious, and the Torah wants to ensure that we're going to do what we can and do what we have to in order to not just care about the other person, but also take actions and steps and do what we are able to do within our unique capabilities to help another individual. So the Torah elaborates it with many, many mitzvahs. So what is this generality here coming to teach us? And this is what the Rebbe is saying is Rashi's question. What Rashi wants to know, or wants to explain to the 5-year-old, is there are so many mitzvahs, at least up until this point, even in the 10 Commandments, where it talks about the things that we're not supposed to do to somebody else, and not supposed to steal or not supposed to kill, and we have so many mitzvahs between us and other people that we already know. By the time we come to this point, what is this coming to add? What is this general mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself coming to add? And that's what Rashi wants the 5-year-old to understand. Now, how does what Rashi says answer the question? By the way, here's some more of those mitzvahs, but these are all part of the same theme of things that you should not do to somebody else, things that you might do. For example, do not slander somebody else. Do not make up stories about somebody else. Do not curse somebody else. And the last one, and it's probably one of the hardest one, is like you should not hate your brother, in other words, a fellow Jew, in your heart. Right? We all know that there are things that we shouldn't say and shouldn't do and shouldn't, God forbid, to hurt somebody's feelings or to embarrass somebody or to steal or to be dishonest with them. But to not hate them in our heart, that's very hard. If somebody, I guess arouses that type of hatred, it can be very difficult to say that it shouldn't even be felt in your heart. We're not even talking about your thought. Machshava is what you think about, and that you actually have control because it's considered a garment of your soul, which means it's just like a garment you could change. So to a thought, you could decide to end a certain thought and start a new thought. So even if it's like entering your thoughts, you could prevent it. But the idea that it shouldn't be in your heart means that you have to be in control of your emotions to fulfill it. You have to be so in control of who you like and who you hate to make sure that you should never ever hate your brother. That's a very tall order. So that's the case where you cannot hate. And by the way, within that same verse is the mitzvah to, I think last week we were talking about when you're required to tell somebody off if they're doing something wrong, to correct somebody if you see them doing something wrong. Notice it's in the same verse that you're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart. And in that same verse is where you should, where you should rebuke your friend if you see them doing something they shouldn't be doing and you need to correct them or you need to improve their behavior. In all those cases, it starts off with making sure that your heart is clean and your heart is in the right place towards that other person, and you're not going to come at it from a negative or from a demeaning, God forbid, or a condescending point of view. That being the case, though, this is probably the hardest to accomplish. If that's the case, though, then what is the Torah coming to add? This is Rashi's question. What's the Torah coming to add by "V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha"? Love your fellow as yourself. Why do we have to have that generality if the Torah breaks it down into such detail of what we're not supposed to do? Then obviously, love your fellow as yourself is a mitzvah. It's like telling us don't steal. Well, obviously, you cannot kidnap or you cannot, like, certain mitzvahs are given to us in a kal v'chomer point of view, which means that the Torah is telling us a stringency, don't do this, which is less, which is what's called less painful or less strict, how much more so not to violate what is even more strict than that. So what is Rashi coming to answer? So Rashi's coming to answer why the Torah has to give us this idea of love your fellow as yourself in addition to all the other mitzvahs the Torah gives us in relation to how we should treat another person. So the Rashi's answer here is that klal gadol b'Torah. The word klal is used in halacha as a generality. It's a principle. It's not a prat means a detail, means a specific, getting specific. So for example, if you make a to-do list for yourself of what you need to do tomorrow, so you can have a general thing. I need to clean my house, or I need to, but that's a generality. The specifics is when you start saying, hey, I need to clean this room, I need to clean this table, I need to do or I need to give this away. Whatever might be the specifics, that's, it has to have the details attached to it, but the klal is a generality. So Rashi's saying is that this mitzvah is not a typical mitzvah. It is a principle, it is a core value. So let's talk about values for a few minutes. Values or core values are required for anyone who wants to ensure that they are grounded, ensure that they are focused, and that their actions are leading somewhere. That's why a company or a business or a nonprofit have to have core values very, very clear, articulated, and communicated to the entire team constantly in order for the team to be on the same page and for the team to always know how to make decisions based on their core values. Companies that don't have good core values don't do well, because when it comes time to deciding if we should do this or do that, or if we should invest in this or not invest in this, or if we should do this project or not this project, if you don't have the core values, then you're not really making decisions based on things that are the founding principles of why you exist and what you're supposed to do. It's your North Star. And it's meant to reflect your actions. A family or even an individual has to have core values. It can't just be assumed. You have to have core values. It's not even a mission statement. It's more than a mission statement. This is who you are to the depth of who you are. This is what you stand for, and these are the lines that will never cross. Core values can never change. Somebody that has core values, or a family that has core values, it's a lot easier for them to make tough decisions about where to live, what to what to celebrate, how to live. Like all these types of questions are answered a lot easier when you have core values. How are these different than values? What's unique? What's unique about the core values? Is values sometimes will change. It's just reality. In life, we change, and sometimes our values will change. Depending on how we acquire those values and depending on how we assume those values in the first place, that will determine a lot of how we, if a value could change or not. But it will happen. When you're calling something a core value, you're saying this can never change. And this can never be compromised, and there's never a time that this will ever be up for debate. So what is Rashi coming to teach us by saying that this is a klal gadol? Rashi doesn't say klal gadol. This is a big principle, which is what I'm using core value, because I believe that's what Rashi is trying to communicate. So what is Rashi trying to say about this principle and it being something that can never change? So let's go further. I'm going to skip this is from the Ten Commandments that we were mentioning before about how you should treat your, like Shabbat. What's a core value of Shabbat? Rest, right? Hashem rested on Shabbat from the seventh day from creating the world. And by resting, we are acknowledging Hashem's creation of the world. We are partnering with Hashem in creation. And by resting, because Hashem rested, that's a core value of Shabbat. So all these other things that we do on Shabbat all emulate from the core value of rest. But here, let's read it over here. Just as rest defines Shabbat and gives shape to its laws, love defines our moral obligation and serves the basis for all the interpersonal mitzvahs. Okay, so what Rashi is trying to say with this being a core value is it's one thing to be ethical and moral towards other people that you don't hurt somebody else. That is, achievable. It's also, even to say don't hate your brother in your heart is also achievable. It's hard, very hard, but it's achievable to the point that you realize that there's no room for hate, period. You can never entertain it. You can never, if you feel it, then something's wrong. You have to fix yourself. These are all things that are understandable to some extent, especially all the things that you have to do, like do not place a stumbling block in front of somebody who's blind, which, as Rashi says over there, also means somebody who's blind in a specific area. So let's say somebody who's not financially literate and they have money, and you are financially literate, and you give them advice that helps you, but doesn't help them. That's the same idea of putting a stumbling block in front of somebody who's blind. So all those types of mitzvos that the Torah is giving us specifics in the ethics and in the way we live out the caring of someone else, that all is understandable and it makes sense and it's achievable, or at least it's somewhat achievable through a lot of effort. However, what's new about this one is not that you should love your neighbor. That's not the punch word, or that's not the key word here. The key word is kamecha, is like yourself. That all of these mitzvos about caring about somebody else, all these, whether it's charity, whether it's judging somebody honestly, whether it's not taking revenge, whether it's the stumbling block, or any mitzvah that's between one person and another, has to be done with this core value of kamecha, of like yourself. In other words, what Rashi is doing is he's applying this principle that this is not a unique mitzvah on its own. It is an illuminator to all the other mitzvahs. It's an illuminator that every mitzvah that is between one person and another, every commandment of how we need to treat another person, even honor your parents, it has to be done in a way of kamecha. It has to be done in a way of the way you would want to be treated, as if it is you. What Rashi, in a sense, is doing is he's making possible mitzvahs impossible. Up until now, you're telling me I have to be honest. Okay, possible. You're telling me don't take revenge. Possible. You're telling me don't cheat somebody. Possible. You're telling, like, all these mitzvahs possible. Don't hate your brother in your heart. Possible. Now what Rashi is saying is that all of these mitzvahs have to be done in a way of kamecha, in a way of like yourself. Everything now is back open and technically impossible, because you, as a human being, it is impossible to love somebody the way you love yourself, even a family member. The only exception would be a child. But loving someone like yourself and fulfilling all of these mitzvos between what for one person and another, like yourself, is impossible. So Rashi just took all these possible mitzvos and turned them impossible. So instead of answering why the Torah is telling us this general principle by saying it's a big principle of the Torah, Rashi's not just, well, he's answering the question of why the Torah brings this, but now he's opening a whole other can of worms with all the other mitzvos of now, how do we accomplish that? And for this, Rashi quotes the source of Rabbi Akiva. Because Rashi will only quote a source if it's absolutely necessary to understand what his answer and what his explanation is. So let's go simply through the question. And how does Torah command us to feel love for every Jew? That is possible, by the way. What this text here is trying to say is like yourself. So this is an interesting one, so let's read it. What the Torah means by yourself is whatever goodness and kindness you think you deserve from those who love you, do that to the others. So in other words, on a simple level, you could say that the way you expect to be treated by other people, that's how you should treat someone else. This, in a way, is possible. That's why I was hesitant to read it. It's a commentary from a German rabbi in the 1500s, but this is making it more realistic. But in a sense, what Rashi is really saying, and what at least the way I feel Rashi is implying, is that it's not just a one-off, because you could do that as a one-off, like you could treat someone else, momentarily the way you want to be treated. But Rashi is saying that everything that you do, in terms of other people, has to be exactly the way you want to be treated. That to live like that consistently is impossible, at least from a human perspective. To live consistently as a human. And every mitzvah that the Torah commands us, whether it's charity, whether it's in the teaching of someone else, whether it's in the relationship or a partnership or anything like that, has to be the way you want to be treated. Lived like that consistently is very difficult. So how does Rabbi Akiva, or bringing Rabbi Akiva into this, answer that question? So, and here the Ramban is laying it out the way the question is. In other words, that's not just a one-time thing. It's not just a one-off. It's everything. Your entire life has to be built on this principle that exactly the way you want, exactly what you want for yourself, you have to expect that, you have to act that for the other person. So here, let's get this. This is elaborating what the Ramban just said. So now, I'm going to give an introduction to Rashi's approach of Rabbi Akiva, and how that actually relates to us and makes it all practical. So let's talk about Rabbi Akiva from not just his story, but also his way of living his life. So Rabbi Akiva, until he was 40 years old, he was a farmer. He was considered to be low society. He was not learned. He couldn't even read Hebrew. In those days, this is like about 50 or 60 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. And it was a really hard time for the Jewish people. So Rabbi Akiva the Jewish community was very split. There was the high society and there was the simple, what was called the simpletons. And Rabbi Akiva was a simpleton. And it wasn't until he was 40 years old that his wife Rachel inspired him and convinced him and encouraged him to go study Torah. And when he did so, he managed to rise to the top and becoming one of the greatest Torah sages of his time, to the point that he had 24,000 students, and even more so after that, even though the 24,000 died in the plague, but he recouped them immediately afterwards, in a sense of students kept on flocking to him. Let's think about that for a second. Forget about the plague. Forget about it, but let's not talk about the plague part of where they died. How does somebody accumulate 24,000 students? Do you know that most of the other sages would have a strict criteria of how somebody would be allowed into their study academy? You couldn't just go up to you couldn't go up to Rabbi Yehuda or Shimon Gamliel. You couldn't go up to them and just walk into their study hall and join their students. You couldn't do that. You have to qualify. Just like you have to get into Harvard, you have to qualify. You have to qualify to become one of the students of these great sages, and they each had a unique method and a unique criteria of what it means to qualify to join their class. Some of them even had rows in their study hall of, depending on what level of intelligence you were, depending on what level of expertise you were in Torah, that's how closer to the front you would sit in the room. That was the mentality. the smarter you were, the more knowledgeable in Torah, the higher you were, the closer you would sit to the sage. And the less you would, or if you were a newbie or you're a rookie, you would sit in the back or closer to the back. Rabbi Akiva didn't have that. In fact, it says about Rabbi Akiva that when he used to give his classes in Syria, which was in the mountains of Syria, or Syria and Lebanon, where those mountains are, it says in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim, they all knew when Rabbi Akiva's class was finished. How? Because they were all sitting on the ground, and the sandy ground, and when they would all stand up, this huge plume of smoke, of sand smoke, would rise in Syria and Lebanon, and in Jerusalem they were able to see, Rabbi Akiva finished this class, because he had 24,000 people all standing up at the same time. That's what happened. So what do we see from this? Rabbi Akiva did not have a criteria to join. In fact, the whole idea of how is it possible that Rabbi Akiva's students were not careful with loving their fellow as herself, being that Rabbi Akiva was the champion of this mitzvah, how is it possible that they didn't, live up to it? Well, and this is me talking. This isn't from a source, but Rabbi Akiva was very open and accepting to anyone who wanted to join and wanted to study. In fact, he had no criteria. Everyone was a potential great scholar, and in fact, he saw that potential in everyone. In fact, when he saw Bar Kokhba, and Bar Kokhba inspiring so many young people to resist the Roman occupation, he called Bar Kokhba Mashiach. He said Bar Kokhba is Mashiach. Now, his fellow sages scolded him and saying, how can you say that? He hasn't done any of the things yet that Mashiach would have to do. But from Rabbi Akiva's perspective, now obviously he was wrong, Bar Kokhba didn't end up being Mashiach, but from his perspective, he saw potential. And potential was there for this individual to rise up and to live that role. In fact, in every generation, it says that there's somebody that has the potential to be Mashiach, meaning that he saw that individual on a much higher level than they actually were. His other sages saw the reality of where every other person was, and therefore refused to accept these things, and also refused to accept them as students. But for Rabbi Akiva, he saw the potential in each of them, which is why he encouraged them to be his students, and which is why they all flocked to him. So that being said, what is Rashi trying to teach us with Rabbi Akiva? Let's read this. The Torah expects us to attain a genuine heartfelt love for one's fellow Jew. This is achieved through action. By actively engaging in all these interpersonal mitzvahs, a person will attain true love. So Rashi is trying to say, and this is why it's quoting Rabbi Akiva, is how very often we do these introspections of ourselves, of who are we, what type of person am I. We want to do these personality studies, and we want to try to understand what our character is and what type of person we are, and how and trying to get a roadmap through our souls of navigating exactly what type, all the different unique characteristics that we have. And usually it's an endless journey, and there's really no answer at the end of it, because if you're trying to live within yourself and just trying to figure yourself out, you'll never come to the real answer. What's Rashi's solution? Action. You're not sure what it means to love your fellow as yourself? Well, try, do something, do a mitzvah, help somebody else, look for someone who needs a favor and do a favor for them. Oh, you didn't feel it was with a full heart, you didn't feel like it was done a kamecha? Okay, fine, do another favor for someone else and just keep up the action. So Rabbi Manas Friedman tells a story about a girl who was in a private audience with the Rebbe, and she told the Rebbe that she feels like she's not nice, that she's not a nice person, and she's wanting to know how she could dive into herself and understand herself to become a nicer person. So the Rebbe asked her, when in your high school, I think she was in high school or college or whatever, at lunchtime. Is lunch served to everyone's tables, or is it a buffet? And she said it's a buffet. So the Rebbe said, okay, here's an idea. Tell your friends for this next lunch to sit down, and you'll bring them lunch. That's it. Now, when this girl's telling the story and telling people how it changed her life, she said that I was asking the Rebbe how to become a nice person, and the Rebbe answered me, be nice. Stop trying to get it perfect, and stop trying to overanalyze it. Put it into action. So Rashi is trying to teach us here is, yes, this is an impossible expectation the Torah has of us by telling us that all these mitzvos, all these interpersonal mitzvos that exist, that are already very difficult, now they're impossible because it has to be on a level of kamecha. So Rashi answered this by inserting the fact that this is a quote of Rabbi Akiva, because we're not telling you need to be this on day one. We're telling you, the Torah is telling you, is start with action. Start taking steps immediately that will lead you on a path to reach this level of caring for another person. And here the Rebbe is going to explain a little bit better. So Rashi answers these questions with his explanation that love another as yourself is a general principle that encompasses many details. Since it is a general principle, it's understood that its practical fulfillment happens through observing the individual details. And that starts with the commandments listed immediately before it. Don't gossip, don't slander, don't hate your fellow, don't take revenge. And even before that, with the command, don't steal. Meaning that this is achieved through the details, but specifically the action-oriented details. Meaning Rashi is comforting us by saying, yes, this is an impossible task. It's an impossible idea that you're consistently going to love somebody the way you love yourself. Even though the Torah expects it, it's impossible. However, act like Rabbi Akiva, or at least bring Rabbi Akiva into it and put it into action. Start with one mitzvah. Start with one person that you could do a favor for. Start with one person that you could start looking at their potential versus their reality, to see how you can encourage them to be even better, to be their true self, and what you could do to help them. Start with just put it into action, put it into real, tangible action, which is why the Torah gave us the action listed before. It gave us all these individual mitzvahs beforehand, giving us the antidote to the impossible mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself. Because now you have the action steps of just starting. Yes, it has to be done ultimately in the right way of kamecha, but if it's done with a sense of I'm just going to do it, I'm not going to overthink it, I'm not going to overanalyze it, if it's kamecha or not, I'm just going to work towards that goal, then you know you're going to get there. When a company works on their core values and has their core values, even though, at least from what I've read, the idea of core values, it has to be who you are already, not just who you want to be. It has to be who you are already. However, I can promise you that in most situations, when a company makes their core values, it's aspirational versus the realistic. In other words, it's very here's what we want to be, in addition to maybe some realism that's included in that. What does that tell you? Now, as long as you're grounded, as long as you know where you want to go and where you want to be, and you're already starting to do it, then you know that every mitzvah is going to actually elevate you and bring you closer to that expectation that the Torah has of kamecha. Now, what happens if we feel like the mitzvah is selfish, or I think there's a TV show once where there's a whole discussion about there's no such thing as a selfless good deed. In other words, because there's always the good feeling that comes from it, or if you believe in karma, that it's going to come back around, or you believe, or even in our sense, we believe that Hashem repays us for every mitzvah that we do. So let's say you're doing the mitzvah because you want Hashem to repay you and give you back many times over, like it says, if you give charity, Hashem repays you, right? That's what it says in the Torah. So what if you give charity with the intention that Hashem wants to repay you? Or Hashem's going to repay you. Or let's say you're doing a mitzvah because of the world to come that you believe you're going to have because of this mitzvah. So what do you do if it's not for the right reasons? And that's what Rashi is coming to avoid and coming to warn, is don't get caught up into the motivations. Don't get caught up into the analyzing of your authenticity or not. Don't worry about that. Focus on the action. Focus on the implementation of a mitzvah, the smallest mitzvah that you could think of, and just start. And that's why, even though Zek called we're starting off with Rabbi Akiva, who, by the way, didn't start until he was 40 years old, which means that he was not able to start just by becoming a great sage. He had to work for it, step by step. So, using that analogy and using that source, Rashi is comforting us by explaining us the antidote to the feeling of the impossible mission of achieving this level of love and care for someone else. Now we want to go through a conversation that a Roman general, and it wasn't the emperor, this was a Roman general that was debating with Rabbi Akiva. The Talmud has many conversations. The Talmud and the Medrash has many conversations that are recorded between the Tanaim, between the sages and the Roman legionnaires or generals or even emperors. There's an individual named Antoninus that the Talmud mentions many times, that he was very close friends with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. It's assumed that Antoninus is Marcus Aurelius, but we don't really know for sure, because the Talmud doesn't tell us exactly who the emperor was. But we know that there were many relationships between the Roman dignitaries and the sages, and mostly because the Romans were, in spite of whatever we feel about them, they were in the height of modernity and intellectual growth, and since Judaism was at the forefront of that, they wanted to tap into that in order to grow as well. So the question was, I'm going to paraphrase it. The question that he asked Rabbi Akiva, this Turnus Rufus, is if Hashem created certain people with certain resources and certain talents and circumstances that led this person to become successful, and did that same for another person in a way that they are not successful and they don't have the resources, then it must be for a reason. In other words, if one person is rich, another person is poor, why should the rich person help the poor? If Hashem wanted that person to be poor, he would have made him rich. And he gives him an example. Let's say a king orders that somebody should be locked away in a prison and they shouldn't be given any food and drink. And somebody violates the king's orders and goes and feeds that person. Wouldn't the king be so upset? That's a treason. The king ordered no food and drink should be brought to the person. If Hashem dictated that this individual should not be of means and should be of lower income status or straight out poor or in poverty, then that's how Hashem wants it. So who are we to try to undo what Hashem created? Who are we to try to undo the reality on the ground? And he uses this metaphor. So Rabbi Akiva responds, and here's how he responds. He says, to the contrary, I will tell you the same exact story, but instead of the king locking up a random person in a dungeon or in a cell and ordering that he shouldn't have food and drink, we're going to talk about the king's son, the prince. The prince upset the king, and the prince it did something very bad. The king it has to punish him. So the king, in his anger, orders that the prince should be locked up and should not be given any food and drink. Now but that was in his anger. But there was a very good friend of the king, and the very good friend of the king knew that the king in his heart wanted his son to have food and doesn't want his son to die. So he went and he fed the king's son. And when the king's anger wore off, the king was very thankful and appreciative of the individual who went against his orders to feed the son. The difference in Rabbi Akiva's analogy and metaphor to this Roman dignitary is that until now it was just some stranger. And if it's some stranger, then the king wanted locked up, then it's technically treason to go against the king's orders. But here, in Rabbi Akiva's analogy, the individual is the king's son. And if we believe that we're all the king's children, we're all God's children, then even in a situation where, for whatever reason, we're not in a situation of means, and by the way, it's not on us to decide why Hashem does things the way he does, and we're not here to assume that it's because they did something wrong. But let's just go with the analogy here. At the same time, Hashem wants this individual, even though they might be going through a tough time, to be taken care of financially. And if you go ahead and do that, the king, Hashem, will be so grateful to you that you took care of his son, of his child. Now, obviously, the idea of anger doesn't apply to Hashem. Although Hashem, through the condensing of Hashem's energy, Hashem allows himself to become angry in a sense that just like a parent or a teacher has to fake anger in order to teach a child a lesson. So, in a sense, when it says Hashem became angry, it's Hashem making himself angry in order to teach us the consequences of our actions and to help us improve. But in any case, the idea is that we are all Hashem's children, and Hashem did create us rich and poor in a way that we should rise to the occasion. If we are rich, it means that Hashem trusts us to take care of the poor. And if we are poor, it means that Hashem trusts that even though we're poor, we're still going to rise to the occasion to achieve our true value, our true potential based on what the talents that Hashem gave us. And God willing, with the help of individuals who are of means, that Hashem entrusted them to be of help to those who are less means. In other words, yes, it's all by design, but it's by design in a way that we should give each other. It's by design in a way that we should all help each other and grow together, even though some are going to be of more means and some of less means. This is a Rabbi Akiva. This is an example of Rabbi Akiva, in the sense that Rabbi Akiva was not about the overanalyzation. He wasn't about about to let some theology decide if a poor person should be taken care of or not. So he immediately turned the story around in order to make it actionable that another person should be helped. Now, when you see a starving person that needs your help and you go help them, do you start thinking, well, do I really mean it? Am I authentic? Am I doing this for some ulterior motive? The poor person doesn't care. He just needs food. He doesn't care what your motives are. So just like that, in a situation like that, where it's so obvious that just do the job that you need to do and help this person, regardless of your motives and authenticity or feelings or inadequacies or whatever it might be holding you back, don't even think about it. Don't even allow that to become an obstacle. So too with every potential mitzvah, with every potential opportunity that you have to help somebody else, don't analyze it or overthink it or allow it to become a mental block or to become a reason why you don't fulfill the mitzvah. In fact, the fulfilling of the mitzvah alone will get you closer, just like Rabbi Akiva is teaching us here, will get you closer to achieving that goal where the king appreciates what you're doing for his only son. And this is where Rabbi Akiva views the potential of every single person. And if everyone's a child of God, they all deserve to be treated that way. And they all deserve to be treated as if Hashem wants that person to be taken care of in the highest possible manner. Are you there yet? Are you able to achieve that yet? Able to feel that yet? You'll get there. But one step at a time, just do the action. Do what you have to do. I use this analogy all the time, but as the Rambam says, that if you lose money and a poor person finds it and is able to sustain themselves from it, you receive the credit of the mitzvah. Even though you did not never met that person, you never intended to give anything to that person. But the very fact that it was your money that you worked for, and that person found it and sustained themselves, and the results were accomplished, that's what matters most. Yes, of course, it's better if you were proactive and gave the money. But the point is that it's about the results, it's about the action. Focus on the action. And that's why Rashi specifically quotes Rabbi Akiva that says it's not about feelings, it's not about authenticity, it's not about any of those things. It's about the results that you could accomplish. And therefore, quoting Rabbi Akiva is the answer to the question of why the Torah is giving us this impossible task. And the quote from the Pirkei Avos here is that the Jewish people are Hashem's beloved children, and this love is amplified by the fact that Hashem publicized our relationship, as the verse states, you are children of Hashem, as it says in Devarim, that if Hashem is publicizing it, it means it's something we're supposed to be proud of, it's something we're supposed to cherish, but most importantly, it means we're supposed to treat each other as such, and therefore ensure that everyone is taken care of to the best possible way. And by doing that, you'll reach the level of kameicha as if you are treating it yourself, because the more you put it into your action and into your routine of this is how you treat somebody else, the more you with every little step, you'll be able to rise to that level in a sense that it actually could be consistent. So the expectation is only impossible if you are trying to achieve it immediately or you're trying to achieve it wholeheartedly without implementing any action. But if you start with the action and let the action take you to where you need it to go and let the results to drive how you live your life, then you know that ultimately the expectation will be achieved, especially because if the Torah asks us to do it, the Torah is giving us the strength, and Hashem actually helps us and guides us. Once we start with the first step, Hashem guides us to help us complete and reach the full level and the full potential of that mitzvah. So even though it is a difficult one, it is one that we are meant to strive to with action and with Hashem's help to be able to achieve it. So summarizing this answer, Rashi mentions Rabbi Akiva by name to further show us how to cultivate the love of a fellow Jew. Rabbi Akiva, or love of a fellow. Rabbi Akiva saw us all as God's children, teaching us to view every Jew as family, and this is the key to achieving that level of love and unity. Okay, so ultimately, Rashi's message here, and the reason why Rashi even mentions something in the first place when there's not an obvious question, is that this has to be a guiding principle of everything that we do, number one. And yes, that's impossible, but if we engage in concrete actions, putting the mitzvahs, putting the results first, and getting the job done first, then it will actually bring this love out, bring this connection out, and this unity out, instead of the slogans, instead of the thoughts, instead of the analyzing and the whatever else we think we have to do. We focus on the action first, the results first. It will lead us and bring us to that point of the way Hashem wants us to live our lives and the way this mitzvah is meant to elevate us and help us get there. So it's not just one mitzvah, but it is a guiding principle that informs and unifies all the interpersonal mitzvahs of the Torah. And yes, it is possible because, as Rashi quotes Rabbi Akiva is here to teach us the practicality and the simplicity of just doing the mitzvah and seeing the potential in another person. So let's hope we'll be able to do that. We should all think of a little mitzvah of something that we could do, one step that we could do, calling somebody we haven't spoken to, or thinking about someone who might be lonely or might need our help, and just try to implement that one action in our life without overthinking it. And God willing, it will lead us to many, many more mitzvahs and ultimately the coming of Mashiach. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being
me.
here. Of course, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask any questions if you have any.